"You don't belong in first class." Those 6 words didn't just ruin a flight, they started a war. 17-year-old Alice Sterling was sitting quietly in seat 1A, wearing a hoodie and old sneakers, when a pompous passenger and a judgmental flight attendant decided she was a fraud. They mocked her, humiliated her, and forcibly removed her from the plane, laughing as they left her on the jet bridge. They thought she was just a helpless teenager trying to sneak a free ride. They didn't know that the dad she was texting wasn't just coming to pick her up. He was coming to shut them down. And by the time his Gulfstream G700 touched the tarmac, the entire airline would wish they had never learned her name. The first-class cabin of Regal Horizon Airlines Flight 402 to New York was a sanctuary of beige leather, soft lighting, and the scent of expensive champagne. It was the kind of atmosphere designed to make the wealthy feel safe from the inconveniences of the world. Alice Sterling, however, didn't look like she belonged in the sanctuary. At 17, Alice preferred comfort over status. She was curled up in seat 1A, the most coveted suite on the plane, wearing an oversized vintage charcoal hoodie, black leggings, and a pair of worn-out Nike Dunks that had seen better days. Her Beats headphones were around her neck, and her curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun. She looked like a regular high school student who might be flying standby, or perhaps someone who had taken a wrong turn on their way to economy. She wasn't. Alice adjusted the seat controls, reclining the massive leather chair slightly. She was exhausted. Her father, Olive Sterling, had sent her to Geneva for a week-long leadership summit for young entrepreneurs, and while it had been inspiring, the constant networking had drained her social battery. All she wanted was to sleep for the 8-hour flight back to JFK, where her dad promised to have her favorite deep-dish pizza waiting for his 50th birthday dinner. "Excuse me." The voice was sharp, dripping with a mixture of confusion and disdain. Alice opened her eyes. Standing over her was a flight attendant. Her name tag read Brenda. Brenda had the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a tight, practiced grimace of customer service that vanished the moment she looked at Alice. "Yes," Alice asked, pulling one earphone away. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Brenda asked. She didn't say it politely. It was a demand, her hand already extended, palm up. Alice blinked. She had already scanned her pass at the gate. She had already been shown to her seat by another attendant. "I showed it at the gate," Alice said softly. "I need to see it again," Brenda snapped, her voice raising just enough to draw the attention of the other passengers settling in. "We have a discrepancy with the manifest." Alice sighed, reaching into the front pocket of her hoodie. She pulled out her phone, unlocked it, and brought up the QR code. It clearly read, "Alice Sterling, seat 1A, first class." Brenda snatched the phone from Alice's hand, staring at the screen with a frown. She swiped at it, zoomed in, and checked the date. She looked for any reason to reject it. Finding none, she huffed, a sound of genuine irritation. "Is there a problem?" Alice asked, taking her phone back. "We'll see," Brenda muttered. She turned on her heel and marched toward the galley, not offering an apology or an explanation. Alice shook her head, putting her headphones back on. "Just relax," she told herself. "Don't let them ruin the vibe." But the vibe was about to get much worse. A shadow fell over her seat. Alice looked up, expecting Brenda again. Instead, she found herself looking at a suit. A very expensive, custom-tailored navy suit. Inside the suit was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a factory that built arrogance. He was in his late 40s, silver hair slicked back, holding a tumbler of scotch that he had seemingly acquired the moment he stepped on board. This was Preston Vain. Alice didn't know his name yet, but she knew his type. He was the kind of man who thought the world was a parking lot valeted specifically for him. "You," Preston said, gesturing with his glass. "You're in my seat." Alice looked around. The cabin was configured with single suites. "I don't think so," she said calmly. "1A. I have the ticket." Preston laughed. It was a dry, barking sound. "Kid, look at you, and look at this seat. Do you really expect me to believe you paid $12,000 for a ticket?" He leaned down, his cologne overpowering, a mix of musk and stale cigars. "Did you sneak up here while the crew wasn't looking? Trying to get a quick selfie for your little TikTok friends?" "I bought the ticket," Alice said, her voice hardening. "Please step away from my suite." "I am a Platinum Legacy member with Regal Horizon," Preston announced, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "I specifically requested the bulkhead suite, 1A. I always sit in 1A. "Well, you must have requested it late," Alice said, turning her attention back to the window, "because I'm sitting here." Preston's face turned a dangerous shade of red. He didn't sit down in the empty seat across the aisle, 2A. Instead, he slammed his hand onto the partition wall of Alice's suite. "Stewardess," he bellowed, "get over here, now!" Brenda appeared instantly, almost as if she had been waiting for the signal. She rushed over to Preston, her demeanor shifting from icy suspicion to fawning subservience. "Mr. Vain, it is so good to see you again," Brenda gushed, placing a hand on his arm. "Is everything all right? Can I get you a refill?" "No, Brenda, everything is not all right," Preston spat, pointing a manicured finger at Alice. "Why is there a stowaway in my seat?" Brenda looked at Alice with pure venom. "I was just investigating that, Mr. Vain. I had a feeling something was wrong." "I am not a stowaway," Alice said, standing up. She wasn't tall, but she had a presence. She had learned posture and confidence from the best, her father. "I have a valid ticket. I showed it to you." "Tickets can be forged," Brenda said dismissively. "We've had issues lately with people using doctored screenshots to sneak into premium cabins." "Check the system," Alice challenged. "My name is on the manifest, Alice Sterling." "I don't need to check the system to know that this doesn't add up," Brenda sneered, looking Alice up and down. "This is a transatlantic flight, miss. This cabin costs more than most people make in a year. Mr. Vain is one of our most valued clients. He needs the bulkhead for his work." "And I need it to sleep," Alice shot back. "I paid for it." "With whose credit card?" Preston interjected, swirling his drink. "Did you steal it from your mummy's purse? Or did you find a card dropped on the sidewalk?" The racism was thin, barely veiled, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. The other passengers in first class were watching now. Some looked uncomfortable, burying their faces in newspapers. Others, an older couple in row 3, were whispering and shaking their heads, looking at Alice with suspicion. No one spoke up for her. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Alice said, her heart pounding. She reached for her phone again. "I'm calling my father." "Oh, she's calling Daddy," Preston mocked. "Is he going to come pick you up in his beat-up Honda?" "Brenda." Preston turned to the flight attendant. "I am not sitting in 2A. I want 1A, and I don't want to spend the next 7 hours breathing the same air as a delinquent. Get her off the plane." Brenda nodded, her decision made. She tapped her earpiece. "Security to the gate, please. We have a non-compliant passenger refusing to vacate a premium seat. Potential fraud." Alice's eyes widened. "You're calling security? Are you insane? Just check the computer." "I am asking you once," Brenda said, her voice cold and official. "Gather your belongings and exit the aircraft. You are disrupting the flight and disturbing our premium passengers." "I am a premium passenger," Alice shouted, frustration finally breaking her calm facade. Lower your voice, Brenda snapped. See? Aggressive behavior. Mr. Vain, I apologize for this. We will handle it. Two men in reflective vests and dark uniforms boarded the plane moments later. They were airport security, not police, but they looked ready for a fight. They lumbered down the aisle, filling the space with an intimidating bulk. This is the one, Brenda said, pointing at Alice like she was a piece of trash. She has a fraudulent ticket and is refusing to move for the actual seat holder. And she's being aggressive. One of the officers, a man with a buzz cut and a name tag reading Officer Miller, stepped into Alice's personal space. Mom, grab your bag. You're coming with us. I haven't done anything wrong, Alice pleaded, holding on to the armrest. I have a ticket. Look, I'll show you the email confirmation. She frantically tapped on her phone, but her hands were shaking. The signal inside the metal tube of the plane was weak. The email was taking too long to load. She's stalling, Preston said, checking his Rolex. I have a meeting in New York. Get this trash out of here. Officer Miller didn't wait for the email. He reached out and grabbed Alice by the forearm. His grip was tight, painful. Hey, let go of me! Alice yelped. Stop resisting! Miller barked. He yanked her. Alice stumbled, her sneaker catching on the carpet. She fell to one knee in the aisle. Her phone clattered to the floor. Preston Vain laughed. He actually laughed. He stepped over her, picked up her phone with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated, and dropped it onto the seat of 1A. You can come back for this when you can afford a ticket, he sneered. That's my phone, Alice screamed, as Miller and his partner hauled her up by her arms. They dragged her backward down the aisle, her hoodie bunching up, her dignity shredded in front of 12 silent watching strangers. As they dragged her past the galley, Alice locked eyes with Brenda. The flight attendant was smiling, smoothing down her skirt, already preparing to serve Preston his pre-flight warm nuts. You're making a mistake, Alice said, her voice trembling with rage, not tears. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. A massive mistake. The only mistake was thinking you could sit with us, Brenda replied sweetly. Have a nice walk home. They shoved her onto the jet bridge. The cool air hit her face. The door of the plane, the heavy, locking door of the Airbus A330, slammed shut in her face. The mechanical thunk of the lock engaging sounded like a gavel coming down. Alice stood there on the accordion-folded floor of the jet bridge, her arm throbbing where Miller had grabbed her. Her phone was still on the plane. Her bag was still in the overhead bin. She had nothing but the clothes on her back and the smart watch on her wrist. She looked down at the Apple Watch Ultra, strapped to her wrist. It had cellular connection. She didn't call the police. She didn't call a lawyer. She tapped the contact labeled Dad. Emergency. It rang once. Alice? Her father's voice was warm, expecting a landing soon text. Everything okay, sweetheart? Alice took a deep breath, staring at the closed door of the plane that was now beginning to push back from the gate. Dad, she said, her voice deadly calm. They just threw me off the plane. They stole my phone. They called me a fraud. And now they're taxiing away with my bag. There was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the room dropped. When Olive Sterling spoke again, his voice was no longer warm. It was a low, terrifying rumble. The voice of a man who moved mountains and crushed obstacles. Who? He asked. Just one word. Regal Horizon, Flight 402. A flight attendant named Brenda and a passenger, Preston Vain. Stay right there, Alice. Don't move, Olive said. I'm checking the transponder. They're still on the ground. Yeah, they're pushing back. Good, Olive said. They aren't going anywhere. Look out the window in 5 minutes. Alice walked to the window of the terminal gate, watching the massive Regal Horizon jet begin its turn toward the runway. "Dad," she whispered. "What are you going to do?" "I'm close, Alice. I was already in the air, coming to meet you early. I'm 10 minutes out in the Global 8000, Olive said. And I just bought their debt yesterday. Technically, I own the fuel they're burning right now." Alice watched the plane. "Watch this," Olive said. High above the cloud layer, cruising at Mach 0.925, was the Obsidian Arrow, a customized Bombardier Global 8000. It was the fastest, longest-range business jet in the world, painted a matte black that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. Inside, the cabin was silent, save for the hum of the air scrubbers. There were no champagne glasses clinking here. The interior was stark, modern, and functional. It was a flying war room. Olive Sterling sat in the command chair, a high-backed leather seat facing a wall of monitors. At 50, Olive looked like a man carved from granite. He wore a simple black t-shirt that cost more than a mid-sized sedan and tactical cargo pants. He didn't dress like a billionaire. He dressed like a man who was ready to work. He was the founder of Sterling Dynamics, a conglomerate that had its hands in everything from aerospace logistics to rare earth mining. He was known in the business world as the Silencer because he didn't scream during negotiations. He just quietly removed his opponent's ability to speak. Right now, his eyes were fixed on a flight radar screen. A small green dot labeled RGL 0402 was slowly creeping along the taxiway at Geneva Airport. "Sir," his pilot, Captain Avery, spoke over the intercom. "We are beginning our descent into Geneva. ATC is asking for our flight plan update. They're saying the pattern is full." Olive pressed the talk button. "Tell them to clear the pattern. Tell them Sterling 1 is declaring a priority landing due to a security incident involving a miner." "Copy that, sir." Olive picked up his satellite phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call the airline's customer service desk. He dialed a private number that belonged to Archibald Thorne, the CEO of the holding group that owned Regal Horizon Airlines. It was 3:00 a.m. in New York, where Thorne was sleeping. Olive didn't care. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Hello? Who is this?" "Archie," Olive said. His voice was smooth, like velvet over gravel. "It's Olive Sterling." There was a pause, then the sound of rustling sheets and a lamp clicking on. "Olive? Good God, do you know what time it is? Is the deal going through? I thought we weren't signing the papers on the aircraft leasing division until next week." "The deal is on pause, Archie," Olive said, watching the green dot of Flight 402 inch closer to the runway. "We have a problem with one of your assets, Flight 402 out of Geneva." "A mechanical issue?" Thorne asked, suddenly awake. "I can get operations on it." "It's a personnel issue," Olive corrected. "Your staff just assaulted my daughter." The silence on the line was deafening. "They... What?" Thorne whispered. "They dragged her off the plane. They called her a thief. They stole her phone. And they left her on a jet bridge in a foreign country without her luggage. And the man sitting in her seat, a Mr. Preston Vain, seems to think he owns the place. Olive, I had no idea. This is terrible. I'll have them issue a refund immediately, and..." "A refund?" Olive let out a short, humorless laugh. "Archie, you misunderstand the gravity of the situation. I don't want a voucher. I want my daughter's dignity back. And I want that plane." "The plane? Olive, it's fully boarded. It's taxiing." "Stop it," Olive commanded. "Turn it around, now. I can't just ground a transatlantic flight because of a dispute. The FAA regulations, the passenger compensation costs, the fuel." "Archie," Olive cut him off. "Who holds the lien on your entire Boeing and Airbus fleet?" Thorne hesitated. "Technically, the bank, but you're buying the debt." "I bought it this morning," Olive lied. He hadn't bought it yet, but he had the contract in his inbox ready to sign. "I am the bank, and I am telling you that aircraft is collateral in a default investigation. Ground it, or I exercise the immediate repayment clause on the entire fleet. Every single plane you have in the sky will be seized the moment it touches the ground." It was a bluff of astronomical proportions, but Olive Sterling never bluffed without a loaded gun. He tapped his tablet, signing the digital contract he had been ignoring for days. Sent. Now it wasn't a bluff. "Okay," Thorne stammered. "Okay, Olive. Jesus, I'm calling ops. I'm turning it around." "And Archie?" Olive added, watching the runway lights of Geneva come into view through his cockpit window. "Make sure Preston Vain stays in seat 1A. I want to look him in the eye." Olive hung up. The obsidian arrow banked hard, cutting in front of a Lufthansa cargo jet. The Geneva control tower was shouting instructions, but Olive's pilot was calm. They touched down with a screech of tires, smoke billowing. Instead of taxiing to the private aviation terminal, the black jet turned onto the main taxiway, blocking the path to the runway. It came to a halt directly in front of the nose of the massive Regal Horizon Airbus. It was a standoff. David versus Goliath, if David was a billionaire in a stealth jet, and Goliath was a commercial airliner filled with confused tourists. Olive stood up and walked to the door of his jet. He checked his watch. Showtime. Inside Flight 402, the atmosphere was jubilant, at least for Preston Vain. He had his scotch, he had his warm nuts, he had the bulkhead seat with the extra legroom. He stretched his legs out, kicking his feet up onto the ottoman. "Finally," he sighed, taking a sip of the amber liquid. "Some peace and quiet." Brenda walked by, beaming. "Is everything satisfactory, Mr. Vain? I brought you an extra pillow." "Perfect, Brenda. You're a gem," Preston said. "I'll be sure to mention your efficiency in my review. Keeping the riffraff out is what keeps Regal Horizon elite." "We try our best," Brenda simpered. "It's a shame about the delay, though. We seem to be stopping." The plane had indeed shuddered to a halt on the tarmac. The engines whined down from their taxiing thrust to an idle hum. The fasten seatbelt light dinged 3 times, a signal usually reserved for emergencies. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The voice crackled over the intercom. It sounded strained, confused. I apologize for the abrupt stop. We have been ordered by ground control to return to the gate immediately." A collective groan went up through the cabin. "What?" Preston snapped, spilling a drop of scotch on his tie. "Return to the gate? For what?" "We have been informed of a security and operational hold placed on this specific aircraft," the pilot continued. "We are being towed back. Please remain seated." "Unbelievable." Preston slammed his glass down. "Brenda, go find out what's happening. If it's a mechanical issue, I demand to be transferred to the British Airways flight." Brenda looked pale. She hurried to the cockpit. She returned 2 minutes later, looking like she had seen a ghost. "Well?" Preston demanded. "The captain says another plane is blocking us," Brenda whispered. "A private jet. It just landed and parked right in our way." "What kind of idiot parks on a taxiway?" Preston scoffed. The massive Airbus began to move backward. The tug vehicle was pushing them. The shame of the reverse taxi was palpable. They weren't flying. They were retreating. 20 minutes later, the plane locked back into the gate. The same gate they had just left. The door opened. Preston expected a mechanic to come on board, or maybe police to arrest the pilot for incompetence. Instead, a man walked in. He didn't wear a pilot's uniform or an airport security vest. He wore black tactical gear and boots that thudded heavily on the floor. He radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated power. Behind him walked Alice Sterling. She had her hoodie up, her hands in her pockets. She looked small next to her father, but she held her head high. The entire first-class cabin went silent. The older couple who had whispered earlier stopped breathing. Olive Sterling didn't look at the passengers. He looked at Brenda. Brenda was trembling. She recognized the man, not from TV, but from the fear in her manager's voice over the internal comms just moments ago. "You," Olive said. He didn't shout. He pointed a finger at her. "Name." "Be Brenda," she squeaked. "Brenda Miller." "Brenda Miller," Olive repeated, memorizing it. "You put your hands on my daughter." "Sir, I was just following protocol," Brenda stammered, backing away until she hit the galley wall. She didn't have a ticket, or I thought." "You thought she was weak," Olive corrected. "You thought she was alone. Protocol requires you to verify a ticket, not assault a minor." Olive turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on seat 1A. Preston Vain was freezing. He still had Alice's phone on the armrest next to him. Olive walked down the aisle. The space felt too small for him. He stopped at row 1. He looked down at Preston. "Mr. Vain, I presume," Olive said. Preston tried to muster his arrogance. He puffed out his chest. "Now look here. I don't know who you think you are, barging onto a secure aircraft." "I'm the landlord," Olive said simply. "The what?" "I own the plane," Olive said. "I own the seat you're sitting in. I own the headset you're wearing. I own the debt on the company that pays for your frequent flyer miles." Olive reached down and picked up Alice's phone from the seat. He wiped it off on his shirt and handed it to his daughter. "Is this him?" Olive asked Alice. Alice looked at Preston, the man who had laughed at her, the man who had called her trash. He looked small now. He looked sweaty. "Yeah," Alice said softly. "That's him." "Get up," Olive said to Preston. "Excuse me?" Preston spluttered. "I paid for this seat." "And I'm refunding you," Olive said. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a money clip, peeled off a stack of $100 bills, probably $5,000 worth, and threw them into Preston's lap. "There, you're refunded. Now get off my plane." "You can't do this. This is illegal. I have rights," Preston shrieked, scrambling as Olive leaned closer. "You have the right to leave," Olive said, his voice dropping to a growl. "Or you have the right to be removed for trespassing on private property. Because as of 5 minutes ago, this aircraft has been decommissioned from commercial service. It is now a private charter. And you are not on the guest list." "Decommissioned?" Brenda gasped from the galley. "But how will we get to New York?" Olive turned to the cabin, addressing everyone. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies," Olive announced, his voice carrying clearly. "This aircraft is being grounded due to a severe failure in management standards. However, I am not a monster. I have arranged for a replacement aircraft from a partner airline at the next gate for all passengers, except 2. He looked at Preston. He looked at Brenda. "Security," Olive called out. The same security guards from before, Officer Miller and his partner, appeared at the door. They looked confused, holding a clipboard. They had been summoned back by the airport authority, who had received a call from the Swiss Minister of Transport, a friend of Olive. "Remove this man," Olive pointed to Preston. "He is trespassing." Officer Miller looked at Preston. He looked at the billionaire. He did the math. "Sir, let's go," Miller said, grabbing Preston's arm, the exact same way he had grabbed Alice's. "Don't touch me! Do you know who I am?" Preston screamed as he was hauled out of the seat. He kicked and flailed, knocking over his scotch. "Careful," Olive said dryly. "You're spilling on my leather." As Preston was dragged past Alice, he looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. Alice didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched him disappear onto the jet bridge, his screams fading away. Olive turned to Brenda. "And you," he said. Brenda was crying now. "Please, I need this job. I have a mortgage." "You should have thought about that before you profiled a teenager," Olive said. "You're not fired, Brenda. That would be too easy. But you are banned from flying on any aircraft owned, leased, or serviced by Sterling Dynamics or its subsidiaries, which effectively means you are grounded. For life." Brenda collapsed into the jump seat, sobbing into her hands. Olive put a hand on Alice's shoulder. "Come on, kiddo," he said gently. "Let's go home. The pizza is getting cold in New York." Alice looked at the empty seat, 1A. Then she looked at the passengers, who were staring at her with awe and fear. "Dad?" she asked. "Yeah? Can we take the jet? The seats are softer." "We're taking the jet," Olive confirmed. They turned and walked off the plane, leaving a cabin full of stunned silence, a crying flight attendant, and a plane that wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. The Obsidian Arrow was cruising at 51,000 feet, far above the weather and the turbulence of the lower atmosphere. Inside, Alice was curled up on a plush velvet sofa, wrapped in a cashmere blanket, eating the pepperoni deep dish pizza her father's chef had heated up in the galley. But she wasn't relaxing. She was scrolling. "Dad," she said, her eyes wide as she looked at her phone. "You need to see this." Olive looked up from his tablet. "What is it?" "We've been in the air for 2 hours. The other passengers from Flight 402. They must have had Wi-Fi on the replacement plane." She turned the screen toward him. It was a TikTok video. The caption read, "Entitled Karen and flight attendant, bully teenager off plane, Nahasha Flight 402. Mahashas racist, dash justice for Alice." The video was shaky, filmed from the perspective of someone sitting in row 2 across the aisle, but the audio was crystal clear. "Did you sneak up here while the crew wasn't looking? Trying to get a quick selfie for your little TikTok friends?" Preston Vain's voice sneered through the speaker. Then the view shifted to Brenda, her face contorted in a sneer. "I am asking you once. Gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." Then came the physical altercation. The camera captured Officer Miller grabbing Alice. It captured the way she stumbled. And most damning of all, it captured Preston Vain, laughing and tossing her phone onto the seat like garbage. The video had been uploaded 90 minutes ago. It already had 14 million views. "Look at the comments," Alice whispered. User 123. "OMG, that's Preston Vain. He's the CEO of Vain Capital. He fired my dad last year just to save a nickel." Fly girl. As a flight attendant, this makes me sick. Brenda violated like 10 protocols. You never touch a passenger unless they are a threat. Justice warrior. "Did you hear her say she's calling her dad? I hope her dad is John Wick." A non-source. "I was on this flight. The dad actually showed up in a private jet and blocked the runway. It was legendary." Olive watched the video, his expression unreadable. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just watched the way Preston Vain looked at his daughter. "Vain Capital," Olive muttered. "I know them." He tapped his intercom. "Captain, get me a secure line to Sarah in public relations, and get the legal team on a conference call. Wake them up." While Olive orchestrated the war from the sky, down on the ground, Preston Vain was living in a nightmare he hadn't yet realized had begun. He was currently seated in the back of the replacement aircraft, a cramped Boeing 737 that Regal Horizon had scrambled to find. There was no first class on this plane. He was squeezed into a middle seat between a crying baby and a man who was eating a tuna sandwich. Preston had no Wi-Fi. He had no idea that while he was complaining about the legroom, The world outside was sharpening its pitchforks. When the replacement flight finally landed at JFK, 4 hours late, the atmosphere in the terminal was electric. Preston pushed his way to the front of the deplaning line, shoving past the mother with the baby. "Out of my way, I have a meeting," he grumbled. He stepped off the jet bridge and into the terminal. Usually, there might be a driver waiting for him with a sign. Today, there was a wall of cameras. Dozens of reporters, paparazzi and streamers with smartphones were crowded around the gate exit. As soon as Preston's face appeared, the flashbulbs blinded him. "Mr. Vain! Mr. Vain!" a reporter from CNN shouted, shoving a microphone in his face. "Do you have any comment on the assault allegations?" "Mr. Vain, why did you call a minor a stowaway based on her appearance?" "Mr. Vain, is it true you're being investigated for a hate crime?" Preston blinked, shielding his eyes. What are you talking about? Get out of my face!" "The video, Mr. Vain," someone shouted. "The whole world has seen the video." Preston pushed past them, his heart hammering. He fumbled for his phone, he turned it on. It buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. It vibrated so hard it almost flew out of his hand. 47. Missed calls, 102. Text messages. The first text was from his board of directors. "Do not speak to the press. Go directly to the office. Emergency meeting." The second text was from his wife. "Preston, what did you do? The news vans are on our lawn. I'm taking the kids to my mother's." Preston stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. He looked up, and for the first time, he noticed the way the people in the airport were looking at him. They weren't looking at a wealthy, powerful man. They were looking at a villain. "That's him," a teenager pointed. "The guy from the plane." "Boo!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Preston Vain, the man who thought he owned the sky, lowered his head and ran for the exit. The conference room of Vain Capital was located on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in Manhattan. It offered a panoramic view of the city, a city Preston Vain used to think he ruled. Now, at 8 a.m. the next morning, the room felt like a prison cell. Preston sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who hadn't slept in days. His suit was rumpled, his eyes were bloodshot. Around the table sat the 6 members of his board of directors. They refused to make eye contact with him. "It will blow over," Preston said, his voice cracking. "It's just a viral video. People have short memories. We issue a generic apology, donate some money to a charity, and in a week, they'll be angry about something else." "Preston," the chairman of the board, a stern woman named Eleanor, sighed. "You don't understand. It's not just the public." "Who cares about the public?" Preston snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Our investors care about returns, and we just closed the quarter with record profits." "Our investors," Eleanor said, sliding a folder across the table, "are leaving." Preston opened the folder. It was a list of withdrawal notices, major hedge funds, pension plans. They were all pulling their capital. "Why?" Preston gasped. "Because of a plane seat?" "Because of toxicity," Eleanor said. "But that's not the worst part. We have a liquidity crisis. We needed the bridge loan from Sterling Dynamics to cover our leverage this month. You know that." Preston froze. "Sterling Dynamics?" "Yes. Olive Sterling's firm. We're signing the deal today. That saves us." The door to the conference room opened. The room went silent. Olive Sterling walked in. He didn't walk in like a guest. He walked in like he owned the building. He was flanked by 2 lawyers in sharp grey suits and Alice. Alice was wearing a simple blazer and jeans. She looked calm, holding a tablet. Preston stood up, confusion warring with fear on his face. "Mr. Sterling, we weren't expecting you personally. I thought we were dealing with your CFO." Olive ignored him. He walked to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down. Alice sat next to him. "You're right, Preston," Olive said, his voice filling the room. "Usually I don't handle mid-level bridge loans, but I decided to make an exception today." "Well, we appreciate it," Preston said, trying to regain his composure. He forced a smile at Alice. "And I see you brought your daughter. Take your child to work day, is it?" It was a pathetic attempt at a joke. No one laughed. "Actually," Olive said, "Alice is here because she has a controlling interest in the decision." "I don't understand," Preston said. "The loan," Olive said, clasping his hands on the table. "The loan you need to keep this company from going bankrupt by noon today. I'm not signing it." Preston felt his knees go weak. He sank back into his chair. "If you don't sign that, we default. Vain Capital collapses." "I know," Olive said. "That's the point. But why? It's bad business. You'll lose the interest." "Preston," Olive said, his voice dropping to that dangerous low rumble. "Do you remember the girl you threw off Flight 402? The one you called a stowaway? The one you humiliated?" Preston looked at Alice, really looked at her. The colour drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Sterling. Alice. Sterling." "You messed with the wrong passenger," Alice said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife. "And you definitely messed with the wrong dad." Olive leaned forward. "Here is what is going to happen. I'm not giving you a loan. I am buying your debt, all of it. Which means, as of this morning, I am the primary creditor of Vain Capital." He slid a single sheet of paper down the long mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of Preston. "This is a resignation letter," Olive said. "You will sign it. You will step down as CEO effective immediately. You will surrender your stock options, and you will leave this building." "And if I don't?" Preston hissed. "I built this company." "If you don't," Olive said calmly, "I trigger the default clause. I seize the company's assets. I liquidate everything. The employees lose their jobs. The shareholders lose everything. And I will personally sue you for the emotional distress caused to my daughter until you are selling that Rolex just to pay for a public defender." The board members looked at Preston. Their eyes were cold. They weren't going to go down with him. "Sign it, Preston," Eleanor said. Preston Vain looked around the room. He looked at the empire he had built on arrogance and aggression. He looked at the teenager he had bullied just 24 hours ago. With a shaking hand, he took out his gold pen. He signed the paper. "Good," Olive said. He stood up. "Now get out." "What?" Preston blinked. "Security," Olive called. 2 guards entered. They weren't the Vain Capital guards. They were Olive's private security. "Escort Mr. Vain to the elevator," Olive ordered. "He has no clearance to be in this building." Preston stood up. He grabbed his briefcase. "Leave the briefcase," Olive said. "Company property." Preston dropped the bag. He walked toward the door, stripped of his title, his company, and his dignity. As he reached the door, Alice spoke up. "Mr. Vain?" Preston turned, a broken man. "You can take your phone," she said, holding up her own device with a small smile. "I wouldn't want you to be bored on the bus ride home." The guards took him by the arms, gently but firmly, and led him out. The boardroom was silent. "So," Olive said, turning to the terrified board members, "now that the trash has been taken out, let's talk about restructuring. I have some ideas about corporate culture I think you should hear." Meanwhile, at the headquarters of Regal Horizon Airlines, a similar scene was unfolding. Archibald Thorne, the airline CEO, was sweating through his shirt. He was on a video call with Olive Sterling, who was multitasking. "We have fired Brenda Miller," Archibald said quickly. "Terminated for cause. Gross misconduct. She will never work in aviation again." "That's a start," Olive said from the screen. "But the rot is deep, Archie. Your culture allowed a man like Preston to think he ruled the cabin. Your staff profiled my daughter because of how she dressed." "We are launching mandatory sensitivity training," Archibald promised. "Not enough," Olive said. "I want a public apology, not a press release. I want you to look into the camera and apologize to Alice, and I want you to start a scholarship program for underprivileged youth who want to enter aviation. You're going to pay for 50 pilot licenses a year. We'll call it the Alice Sterling Aviation Scholarship." 50? Archibald choked. "That will cost millions." "Consider it a discount," Olive said, "compared to me buying your airline and turning your planes into cargo freighters for fertilizer." "Done," Archibald said instantly. "It's done." Olive ended the call. He looked at Alice, who was standing by the window of the Vain Capital boardroom, looking out at the city. "You okay?" he asked, walking over to her. Alice took a deep breath. "Yeah, I'm okay." "Was it enough?" he asked. "Did we get him?" Alice looked down at the street, where she could see a tiny figure, Preston Vain, walking out of the building alone, instantly swarmed by paparazzi who had been tipped off about his firing. "We got him," Alice said. "But Dad?" "Yeah? Next time, can I just fly in the jet with you? The pizza is way better." Olive laughed, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. "Deal." 6 months had passed since the incident on the tarmac at Geneva, but the shockwaves were still reshaping the aviation industry. The morning sun streamed through the massive glass windows of Hangar 4 at JFK International Airport. The hangar had been transformed into a stage for a gala event. There were no red carpets, no velvet ropes, and no exclusion zones. It was an open house, filled with mechanics, pilots, baggage handlers, and students. At the center of the stage stood a new aircraft. It was an Airbus A350, but the old stuffy gold and navy livery of Regal Horizon was gone. In its place was a sleek, modern design, a fuselage of brilliant white with a tail fin painted in a gradient of sunrise orange and deep violet. On the side of the fuselage, in bold, modern lettering, was the new name, Ascend Air. Alice Sterling stood at the podium. She looked different than she had on that jet bridge in Geneva. The oversized hoodie was gone, replaced by a sharp, tailored navy blazer over a white t-shirt and clean white sneakers. She didn't look like a stowaway anymore. She looked like the future. She tapped the microphone, the sound echoing through the hangar. The crowd, a mix of press and airline employees, went silent. 6 months ago, Alice began, her voice steady and amplified. I was told I didn't belong in Seat 1A. I was told that excellence had a specific look, that it wore a suit, drank scotch, and looked down on everyone else. I was told that because I was young, and black, and dressed for comfort, I must be a fraud. She paused, looking out at the front row. Olive Sterling was sitting there. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't whispering to aides. He was leaning forward, his elbows on his knees, watching his daughter with an intensity that terrified his enemies and warmed his family. That day, Alice continued, my father taught a very expensive lesson to some very arrogant people. But today isn't about revenge. Revenge is easy. Change is hard. She gestured to the group of 20 young people standing behind her. They were diverse, eager, and wearing fresh flight suits with the Ascend Air logo. This is the first graduating class of the Alice Sterling Aviation Scholarship, she announced. These are kids from neighborhoods that usually only see planes flying over them, never imagining they could be inside the cockpit. They've spent the last 6 months training. They are the top of their class. And starting tomorrow, They are your new first officers and engineers." The crowd erupted in applause. It wasn't polite golf claps. It was a roar of genuine approval. "Ascend Air is built on a new rule," Alice said, her voice rising over the applause. "We don't judge our passengers by their clothes. We don't judge our staff by their background. We judge everyone by their character. The sky is big enough for everyone. But if you think you're better than the person sitting next to you, you can take the bus." Laughter rippled through the hangar. Alice smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "Thank you." As she walked off the stage, Olive stood up and engulfed her in a hug. "You did good, kid," he rumbled. "Better than you?" she teased. "Let's not get carried away," he grinned. "But close." Far away from the applause, the flashbulbs and the champagne, life looked very different for the kings of the old world. In a cramped, fluorescent-lit break room of a mid-level logistics warehouse in New Jersey, a man sat alone at a plastic table. Preston Vain looked 10 years older. His silver hair, once slicked back and perfectly coiffed, was thinning and messy. He wore a grey uniform with a name tag that simply read, P. Vain. Packer. He was eating a cold sandwich from a vending machine. On the wall, a small TV was playing the news. The anchor's voice drifted over the hum of the warehouse conveyor belts. "And with the launch of Ascend Air, Alice Sterling has cemented herself as a new voice in aviation, proving that the Sterling legacy is in good hands." Preston stopped chewing. He watched the screen. He saw Alice shaking hands with the pilot graduates. He saw Olive Sterling standing in the background, looking like a titan. Preston looked down at his hands. They were dry and covered in paper cuts from cardboard boxes. He had lost his firm. He had lost his reputation. His wife had left him, taking the kids and the house in the Hamptons. He was radioactive in the business world. No one would hire the man who became the face of corporate bigotry. A supervisor stuck his head into the break room. "Vain, break's over!" the supervisor shouted. "Line 4 is backed up. Get moving, or you're written up." Preston flinched. The tone was exactly the same tone he used to use on flight attendants. "I'm coming," Preston whispered. He crumpled his sandwich wrapper, threw it in the trash, and walked back to the line. He wasn't a Diamond Medallion member anymore. He was just another cog in the machine. Back at JFK, the event was winding down. Alice and Olive walked out to the tarmac where the Obsidian Arrow, the massive Global 8000, was waiting. Its black paint absorbed the sunlight, looking like a shadow against the bright white of the new Ascend Air fleet. "So," Olive said, as they walked up the stairs of the private jet. "Where to next? London? Tokyo?" Alice stopped at the top of the stairs and looked back at the airport. She watched a commercial jet take off, soaring into the clouds. "Actually," she said, "I was thinking we go home. I have a chemistry test on Monday." Olive laughed, a deep, booming sound. "A chemistry test. Right. I forgot you're still in high school." "Someone has to keep it real," Alice said. They stepped inside. The heavy door closed, shutting out the noise of the world. Alice sat in her favorite seat, kicked off her sneakers, and pulled her knees up to her chest. She picked up her phone. She had one unread message. It was from an unknown number. "I saw the speech. You were right. I'm sorry. Brenda." Alice looked at the text for a long moment. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. She deleted the message, put her phone down, and looked out the window as the engines roared to life. She didn't need their apologies. She had her wings, and as the black jet rocketed down the runway and pierced the sky, leaving the world far below, Alice Sterling knew one thing for sure. No one would ever tell her where she belonged ever again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how one entitled billionaire and a judgmental flight attendant learned the hardest lesson of their lives. You never judge a book by its cover, especially when that book has a dad who can buy the library. It's satisfying to see Preston Vain go from flying first class to packing boxes, isn't it? It just goes to show that money can buy a ticket, but it can't buy class. And karma? Well, karma never loses a bag. What do you think? Did Preston and Brenda get what they deserved, or was the punishment too harsh? If you were Olive Sterling, what would you have done? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, stay humble, and I'll see you in the next one.